Hello and welcome to another edition of Kayak Fishing Weekly. I'm your host, Justin Largen, and as always, we're the show on the Serious Angler Network that is dedicated to all things kayak fishing. So, welcome to 2025. This is our first episode of the new year. I apologize, I guess, now for how I may sound and appear. A little bit under the weather. I got a chance to see family over Christmas. And yeah, I got a bunch of nieces, and they're not the best at covering their mouth when they cough and sneeze. So picked up a little bit of a cold, but we're going to power through it. I talked, I guess it was the last episode, about how one of the things I want to do a better job of this year is consistency with the show. I want to make sure I'm getting content out to everybody every week. We're shooting for 50 episodes in 2025. So it's a good opportunity for me to demonstrate my resolve there. I'm going to power through this cold and hopefully bring you some fun content, some good information. We're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're back to bass fishing this week, and I've got a guest who is very good with something that I'm not good at. He's good with a jerkbait. Uh, as I said, I'm not. I've caught fish with them, uh, but not a lot of fish, and it's just something I don't have a ton of confidence in. Something I plan to devote some more time to this winter. I want to get better at it, and I thought, what better way than to pick the brain of somebody who's really good. Rolando Nandin has he's won a couple of national tournaments, a couple of BOS events. He's a hammer down in Texas. And he's very, very good with a jerkbait. So we're going to be talking to him. I'm trying to see other news and notes. There's not a ton going on in the industry. We've talked about sort of some of the upcoming schedules. The native no limit schedule, I have not seen it yet. I expect it to drop any day, and once I see that, I'll share that. Definitely looking forward to seeing what they do this year. What kind of other opportunities are going to be out there on the sort of national scene. But before I go and bring Rolando on here, want to welcome Sniper Marine to the Kayak Fishing Weekly team. They make really innovative tools for using forward-facing sonar, including mounts that you can use in a kayak. There's a number of guys who are very good with forward-facing from a kayak that utilize Sniper Marine. So I'm excited to be partnering with them. We're going to try and bring you some forward-facing content. It's something that I am not good at. It's something I've never utilized, but I plan to change that this year. Hopefully, bring you guys along for the ride. Hopefully, we'll have some fun guests who can teach me how to not suck at forward-facing. So again, welcome to Sniper Marine. And I think that's all I've got as far as the preliminaries. So let's go ahead and welcome our guest. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Rolando Nandin. Rolando, thanks for joining me.
Hey, no, thanks for having me here, Justin. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So, as I was saying, I don't know of anybody that I don't know anybody that's better at a jerkbait than you, or at least that's won tournaments the way that you have on a jerkbait. It's something that I'm not good at. Uh, so I want to kind of do I guess an intro to jerkbait. What do people need to know to get started? But before we jump into all that, I guess I want to ask a more broad question. Kind of hear a little bit about your background and how you got into the kayak fishing world.
Yeah, actually, I got in the kayak fishing world probably, I think it was in 2016 or 17. And I, everybody's kind of usually that loves fishing, usually has been doing it for since they were a kid. Didn't do a whole lot of tournament fishing as a kid, but I did a lot of pond fishing, a lot of, you know, old traditional, bells and live bait type of deal
Oh
growing
yeah.
up. And then I think around, 2016, I had a friend invite me out kayak fishing, liked it, went to academy, bought a basic type of kayak, did that. Was gonna buy a boat. Then I found out about tournaments, and I was like, "Oh man, you can do actually tournaments on kayak." I was like, "Hey, let me give that a try." And that was it, and I was hooked. It was pretty easy. It started off with a lot of tournaments in the Austin area. I'm in the San Antonio, but I would travel to Austin to go fish some of those uh, kayak tournaments. Oh gosh, I can't remember the trail now. I'm going blank. And one of the longest lasting trails, um,
Okay.
and real competitive. And I had a friend of mine that had invited me out fishing. His name is Keith Villegas. So we went out and we did a little bit of fishing. And he's the one that was kind of introduced me to a couple of kayak stuff. And it was, I mean, that's all I needed, man. It was just, triggering what I already used to like as a kid, and then got into that competitive competition stuff, and never looked back. I do a couple boat tournaments now, but I still really enjoy the kayak fishing. Something about that,
Yeah, I
So
remember running into you. I think it was 21 on Lake Fork, and I don't know if you remember, but I that was one of my first national tournaments, really first tournaments ever, and I had a good tournament. I think you had a good tournament also. I think you were in the top 10, and I
was that
remember
was that the
I,
real cold one? Like it was like
this
super
that
freezing.
was the one before, I think,
Okay.
where it was at least where I was. They had just pulled up. There were a ton of people catching spawners, and I remember, at least if I remember correctly, I remember you talking about catching a great big one out on a jerkbait.
Yeah, yeah, probably most likely. That's when between 2008, well, right when I started in 16, and I've always liked jerk baits. About 2018, I was using the jerk bait always pretty heavily, and it was really unfair, man. Like that stuff was when I when that live scope came out, I didn't even know what it was. Wife actually bought it for me for Christmas. And when I opened it, I was like, "What the hell is this? Is this like a underwater camera or something?" Hadn't been keeping up with the technology, and when I realized how effective that jerkbait was using that stuff, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is ridiculous!" Like it was just so unreal on how you could just pick fish apart using that stuff. And over time, it's gotten a lot more difficult. It's not the same as it used to be. So fish are smart, but man, I will tell you that it still is very effective. It's just
Okay,
not. It's not as effective year round like it was. Like it was year round. You
gotcha.
could you could do it any time of the year, and it was
So
very effective.
so you were getting on it when it was, I mean, first coming out. You're one of
Yeah,
the live scope OGs then.
yeah, yeah. When it first came out, I my wife had bought it for me, and I started messing around with it. Took me about 6 months because there was no YouTube. There was like no real information that you could use, and it did alter the way I fished. So one thing I noticed is that I was not good with it going into tournaments. First couple of times, I actually did worse using it the first couple of. I mean, I would say it was close to a year before I actually got really good with it. Now you can
Okay,
get good with it pretty quick because you can cut that learning curve. Just a lot of things you can watch these days, and people kind of just spilling the juice on a lot of things. So it's not as hard to adapt to that style of fishing. Um,
okay,
but I mean, there's times where I like to go without it, and do traditional deal. But I will tell you that the jerk bait really didn't come. Like I still love the jerk bait back then, but it wasn't as effective to catching big fish as it is when combining with live scope. Yeah.
gotcha. So you were using it before, but then the live
Mhm.
scope just made it more effective.
Yeah, it made it more effective. Yep.
And I guess we should start with kind of what a jerkbait is for anybody that's not familiar. I've got an
Yep.
example. That's a 6 cents provoke there, the deep diving version. Basically just a
Mm.
long, slender minnow style bait, and you kind of jerk it and it darts and does crazy things to trigger fish. Is that a fair, I know it's not exactly a scientific definition, but is that a
Yeah.
fair description of what the jerkbait does?
Yeah, yeah, you got different jerk baits these days that do, they roll, and then you got some that dart really fast. You got floating, suspending, then you got some that sink. And I found the value of sinking a jerk bait early on when I got the live scope, and it was mainly because I broke it. and it got filled, would fill with water.
Like
So
cracked it on something
cracked
and
it, yeah, cracked it on
okay.
something, and then it just started turning my wheels a little bit. And I was like, hey, what about if I sink these things down to like brush piles and you know, getting it down there on those fish that just don't see this thing like in 15 plus feet, because your deep divers only really go like 7 to 8 feet if you're lucky. You know what I'm saying? Depending on how you go, but once you start getting it down there in that 12 to 15, I mean even 20, fish are not used to seeing the jerkbait that deep. So when I learned to do that early on, yes, this was before Patrick Walters destroyed everybody on Lake Fork.
Okay.
I was already doing that, and I was like, oh my god! I was like, he just
He
let the freaking you know juice out. It's like,
told the world.
yep, yep.
He blew that tournament out too. I don't remember the specific weights, but it wasn't even close.
It wasn't even close. Yeah, you could. Some people will argue, right? There's not a lot of skill involved in that, and to a certain extent, I would have to kind of agree a little bit, but I would say that in order to get to understanding that and being able to do that, you have to know fishing first. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got
Okay.
to know where to find those big fish. Like, a lot of people, if you don't have a lot of knowledge in fishing and just come out and try to use a live scope, can you catch fish? And absolutely, you can probably catch numbers. It's a different game trying to catch 25, 30 pounds, trying to win tournaments. Like you can
Gotcha.
catch a lot of fish, but to win tournaments, it's like you got to have a combination of things. Like you have to know fishing because you got to get around the big fish, and then you have to be able to cycle through baits. So you got to have some background. I mean, you can't just give someone a live scope and expect them to win a tournament. Can that happen? Absolutely, right? But you're going to see that kind of trickle off because they're not going to be able to stay consistent based on conditions and things changing and things like that. But yeah, there's a level of skill that is involved with that. But I would have to say that like people watch things now and kind of just go duplicate that, and then all of a sudden you feel like you can go win a tournament. Then you realize like, holy, it takes a little bit more than that just to you got to practice, find the right places, and then when you're fishing on your own, yeah, it's all great. You ain't got no competition fishing pressuring those fish. The minute you go on a tournament, you realize like, holy moly, I can't hit my same spots as often. I can't cycle through them like I'd like to. So you got to all of those variables play into that. So then that's when all your different levels of skills of different techniques and things like that come into play. So you know during the week you go fish on a Wednesday or Thursday, you realize you catch more fish than you do on a Saturday. I don't know, but
That's
I
the best.
believe that I always do believe that there's on weekends those fish take a break, man. Like I feel like it's always harder on the weekend to catch fish than it is during the week.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I like getting like Tuesday, Wednesday, like giving them a couple days to rest from whatever pressure from the weekend and hit it. That when I have a day off midweek, I love it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I remember I used to hate it. I wanted to be off on the weekends and anymore. No, I'll take those midweek days,
Oh,
no
it's big.
problem.
Yeah.
That's the fishing's better.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, oh man, fish actually do bite still. Damn.
Yeah, you probably I probably get a false sense of like what my own ability is because you go out there and you can have a day where you smash them midweek, but like you say, it's different when there's competition and
Yeah.
it's not just you kind of fun fishing.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So when it comes to jerkbait fishing, at least this time of year, I know you're Texas, so it's probably a little warmer than here,
Right.
but what are you looking for? Is this a good time of year in your opinion for it? And then what are you looking for as far as like cover, depth? Um, what makes you want to pick that jerk bait up this time of year?
Yeah, I would tell you. I mean, the jerk bait. It's no secret, right? It always shines in colder water, and there is definitely truth to that. You take it back 5, 6 years, and it was pretty close during the summer too. It nowadays because people are fishing it more often. You probably don't. It's not as effective. outside of the cold season as it was when I previously, was doing it then back then when scope came out. But what I look for most of the time is definitely colder waters in Texas is like 55 and under, right? 58,
Okay.
because right now the water temps are still, you can still find water temps in the six, high 50s, low 60s. We really don't get below 55 hardly ever, unless you go to that Dallas, right, in San Antonio, that like San Antonio down, it
Mhm.
doesn't get that cold. Dallas does get cold. Dallas, Texas gets cold, so you can find some really cold water up there sometimes. But I'm always looking for, I have a different types of jerk baits. So when I look at the water temps, um, most of the time you're not pausing as long as you do up north. Your pauses are
Okay.
like maybe you jerk one, two, three, and then 1001, 1002, and then you're hitting it again. I'm really not. It's hard for me to do those long pauses
Okay.
naturally, just because of the way I like to fish fast. But second, we don't have enough cold water, right? We're not getting into the 30s, high 30s and 40 temp waters often. So we don't have those long pauses down here. Um, so I'm always
So you
looking for clarity. I like it to be probably 2 feet of visibility. 1.5 is pushing it, but 1.5 works with live scope if you're putting it on right on them. It's actually very easy to catch fish in dirty water with the jerkbait, but you got to be good with the scope, meaning you got to put it right on the fish, right? And
okay?
so they'll eat it. They'll eat it in dirty water, uh, and then in clear water. I mean, it's the same principles apply, right? The cleaner the water, the more natural that you want to go. You know, I like translucent type of jerk baits when it's sunny and you get that sheen off of it. If you got 5, 6 quality of water, I'm not going with anything super super bright, unless you're fishing for like smallmouth. Smallmouth tend to like that colorful stuff, and I notice that sometimes I can get them to react. But most of the time, our waters down here in the south, it's especially East Texas, they tend to have stain. So I usually like to find something that's in between, that's not too bright, but usually get about 2 feet of visibility. You know,
Okay.
so
I didn't
if
even
you,
you said sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You said
oh, you
something about smallmouth a minute ago. I didn't even realize you guys had smallmouth down there.
yeah, we do. We actually have. So I'm in San Antonio. Belton Lake is I don't know, probably 2.5 hours from me. It's in the Austin area, Central Texas. We have smallmouth there, and
Okay.
yep. And then there's a couple other places that you'll find them. I can't remember which other lakes, but Belton Lake has them. So we do fish for those whenever we can. They don't get as big as they do up north, right? But
Okay.
we still get to dabble with them here. A few. That
Have you ventured up to the Susky before?
No, I haven't. Dude, that's on my bucket list. I want to.
Dude, I'm curious to see what you could do up there with a jerkbait. I mean, I feel
Yeah,
like it doesn't matter what you throw almost up there. I feel like anybody can go up there with anything and just have an
just
awesome day. But
awesome day. Yeah,
that place is, I mean, we've got pretty good rivers here in Virginia, and they're in a bunch of the lakes too, and they get fairly big. Not not 6 and 7 pounds like they do up north, but
yeah,
the Susky is. I've been a couple of times, and that place. Uh, yeah, it doesn't disappoint. So you got
no,
to you got to make your way up there and yeah, mess with those things.
yep, yep.
Well, you actually you touched on something else I was going to ask about water clarity because I always thought clear water. That was what I always heard is, oh, you got to have like 3 feet of visibility or it doesn't work. But you're saying it's you can catch it in that stained water as well or better than in the clear water.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, if when you're talking about like 5+ pounders in the dirty water, a lot of the fish don't tend to roam as much and like they do in clear water. Clear water, their visibility is better, so they tend to move around a lot. They tend to be more tight to structure whenever it's dirtier water. So when you find like brush piles and things like that, and you put a jerk bait on them, it's way easier to get them to trigger to eat that thing because they don't get a good visibility at it like they do in clear water. One of the one of the things that I've noticed with what LiveScope has kind of exposed is that big fish have been around and they've probably been around the block a few times. So they tend to want to observe their food a little bit more than they do when you're catching young, like smaller fish. So when people tell you like, oh, I catch fish all the time with braid or versus fluoro, I'm like, yeah, but what size quality fish are you catching? Are you talking about 1 pounders, 2 pounders? Because when you're talking about catching caliber fish of like 5+ pounders, they've been around the block a few times. They tend to, if you watch LiveScope, they tend to observe their food more. You know, so you will have a harder time catching a 5+ pounder if your stuff doesn't look as natural or good because they do observe it a little bit more. Unless you find those opportunities where like spawn season, right? Where or there's times of years when they're feeding up for the winter that they're a little more aggressive, so that natural stuff doesn't play as much of a role. But any other time, like if you want to trigger a big fish to bite, it has to look right because they observe more than the smaller fish do. So, and how do you win tournaments? You got to catch big fish. Like you
Yeah.
can't. There's does you no good to catch 20+ fish if they're going to be 1 pounders all, and you're just yeah, you'll hear those stories, and I mean I've been through it myself where catching a lot of fish, but big fish don't bite that easy, and so you gotta dirty water. You tend to have a better chance of getting that big fish to trigger if you put it right on him. So when you combine your skills with live scope and structure fishing, a lot of the times in the tournament fishing, when you're in a tournament, your pre-fishing matters because you're creating milk runs for yourself and you're targeting big fish areas. So can you win tournaments beating the bank? Yeah, that's how we all got started fishing right before live scope is beating the bank. And normally during the spawn season, yeah, you're gonna catch big fish on the bank, but when it's not spawning season, you got to know where they live and then you got to trigger them. Most of your people that are really really good at winning tournaments, they know how to target big fish specifically, and stained water just adds that variable of making it a little bit easier to trigger that fish if you can just put it right on him. Because there's been plenty of times where I'm at port and I'm fishing in dirtier water and I'm fishing with a white jerk bait, and I throw it right on the top of it, get it right over his head, and he'll strike at it, you know. Where in clear water, they tend to look at it, they go up to it, and then they'll follow it. In dirty water, they they, they don't really absorb. They kind of just more of a reaction. So I mean, dirty. That's why a lot of people target stained water because it is easier to trigger fish to bite, just because of their instinct. In clear water, people don't like clear water because you have to technically fool them into thinking it's real food. So, but jerk baits, that's why I carry a variety for dirty water, clean water. Uh, you'll see me sometimes in some dirty water, and it's if I'm fishing a jerk bait in dirty water, it's because I'm fishing a very specific spot. I'm not running a bank with the jerk bait on dirty water.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's
So
just
it's
because
very target oriented.
very target oriented. Yeah.
Okay. Now you mentioned you like those translucent colors when it's sunny and when you got some cleaner water. Do you keep those same sort of lifelike colors in that stained water, or do you go more bold, or
No,
does it
yeah,
you mix it up some?
I do mix it up. I mean, general rule of thumb is if it's dirty water, I want them to have something to spot, right? So I tend to have a little bit more of a bold color if it's dirty water, and then cleaner water, I'm trying to make them react to something and make a mistake, so that they can bite it. Again, this is with the mentality of going for a 5+ pounder. If I'm catching 1 2 pounders, it doesn't matter what you throw in there. They're young to the world, just like we were when we were young, chasing. It's no different than those young fish are going to do the same thing, right? They're going to make mistakes a lot easier than the bigger fish are. If you're targeting big fish, you're going to need to take a lot of that stuff into account.
Okay. So I'm a little bit curious I guess this is as good a time to any to talk about the specific baits. You mentioned you've got a variety, and there's they do different things. Um, I guess the one that to me, at least the one that I hear about all the time, is the Megabass Vision 110. But I'm curious if you like that one, or if uh, if you like a lot of them.
No, there's a lot of good jerk baits out there. I think the staple is, is one of the best jerk baits that tradition that has kind of said it's is the staple type of bait, for using jerk baits is the mega bass, and it's just because it reacts in the water, and it was one of the best baits to kind of really get that life look deal to it, as opposed to just a very straight type of body. I think that little curve at the end, the tail, and those baits, the Japanese, they just fine tune everything. It's a lot more streamlined. You don't have very bulky hooks sticking out. The
Mm,
more natural you make it look, and the more finessey, it's just easier to fool bigger fish to eat it. You got big treble hooks on there and big things. Like, it's harder in clear water for them to commit unless you're really, really moving it quick, and there's movement in the water. If you're in a river system that has flow, right? That's easier because it's breaking the. There's too much movement. They're not going to get a good look at it. But we fish a lot of lakes, stagnant water that's not moving a whole lot.
yeah.
So if you're doing that, obviously the jerk bait shines a lot more when there's the water's being disrupted, right? There's wind and things like that, just like it is for a spinner bait or a crankbait, right? You want some sort of disturbance, right, in the water, because it allows them to make that mistake. No different on a moving bait and jerk bait, but yeah, the there's something special about that megabass, but they see it more often. So now you have to, find
Ah,
different type of jerk baits to kind of cycle through. And there's times where I'm cutting, 6, 7 different jerk baits that I've tied on just to try to get a fish to trigger if I find a big fish, right? I'm seeing a 6, 7 pounder on the screen. They're not reacting to my bait. Then I go to upsize. I upsize my jerk bait, right? Or if
okay.
that's not happening, then it's a timing deal, right? They're not hungry. They don't want to eat. So I just go through my rotation of things, come back, and maybe I can trigger to get him to eat. Uh, but yeah, there's a lot of different. I mean, Jackal makes a really good one. Spro makes. They have a new one. I think now. I think is a Spro that's pretty unique. That has a kind of like a little. I think it's Spro. That has like a
The
little metal
McStick.
thing. It's got like a metal plate on the top now that apparently you can see it because it allows for the scope to
Oh,
react. I think it's Spro. That's a new
I
one. I
haven't
have
seen that
not
one.
fished. I haven't fished it. It's kind of a new one. Shimano makes pretty good ones that they have that little flasher in them. That works sometimes, right? Because
Okay.
when you pause it, that thing is flickering, kind of meaning
Yeah,
like it's still alive.
I was
Uh,
totally sold on the idea because they put that in that little popper too, and like,
mhm.
there's part of me that, like, they definitely sold it to me. I don't know. I haven't done well enough with it yet to like really be convinced whether the fish care,
Yeah,
but if you say it matters, hey,
it just depends, and it's unfortunate that there's pros and cons to all this technology, right? The fish are just getting more adapted to this stuff. There's more and more people are throwing jerk bait, so it's not as easy to trick them with it. And so, um, for me, it's just the more realistic it looks, and the faster, and it depends when you throw it. Like, I like to throw my jerk baits when there's some sort of disturbance on the water, right? You got to have some sort of wind. If it's too still and it's just calm, you're gonna have a hard time making the jerk bait work, unless it's active feeding early in the morning, or they're or he's just, or you hit him with it, right? Because you actually snag him or something. That's about the only time you can really get these fish to trigger. But when you mentioned earlier about my win in cattle, that was a windy day, I think, when I was using that jerk bait.
okay.
So usually that's when I usually shine with the jerk bait. You get that disturbance on the water, and it's windy, it's gonna be really good.
And that that tournament, I was there, and yeah, I didn't catch them nearly as good as you did, but I couldn't believe, like, I knew at that point you were good with the jerk bait, but it was really cool to listen to the awards and hear how you actually did it. Because I never would have thought a big, I mean, basically a shallow swamp that's, cypress trees everywhere and some grass in places. I never would have thought jerk bait in that. I was trying to throw a swim jig or flip or
Yeah,
spinner bait. Um, but the jerk, I mean, you won that tournament. I think I had I thought I had it up here with the
yeah,
totals. It
yeah. I
was,
don't remember the totals actually off the top of my head, but
oh, I'll find it. I thought I was prepared. Find the results. Yeah, 191 inches. So over a 95-inch a day average,
yeah.
which yeah, that'll win you most tournaments.
Yeah, no, it was I was catching some fish, and then around noon, I think it was on the second day, I was like, man, I'm not catching them that good anymore. And then I said, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and try to jerk bait. I threw a jerk bait to one of these trees, and I had already ran a crankbait through there. I want to say I had ran a swim jig too, and I saw them, and they just weren't reacting to it. I was like, you know what? Threw my jerk bait in there, passed it right through there, and I could just see them like react. And I was like, oh, they want this. And then I just started doing. And usually I throw my jerk baits on 12-pound test line. 12-pound test line is usually stronger than most people think. It's pretty good. And I throw it in. I throw it into trees. And the I like the longer blade or the longer bill,
Okay.
because if I do hit something, that bill will bounce off of it. You know what I'm saying? And so that bigger bill usually kind of helps me from hanging up too much. Now, in your mind, you're thinking, well, it's going to go deeper. It just depends. You know, most the principles of jerk baits, right, is always using your jerk bait uh, downwards, but the fish have no idea that you're jerking down or up, right? So at the end of the day, if you can make that jerk bait look the way it does with the way you're jerking bait down, it's just a reaction bait. So you always, you throw it out there, you just jerk it up, and then that bill wants to keep it down, but you keep it in that right depth zone. But if you hit that tree with that bill, it doesn't allow those hooks to grab onto it as easy as a short bill will.
Okay. So you're saying snapping up, and you can keep
If you're
the plus one from running deeper
Mhm.
and use it like a standard version. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, you can do
That's
that.
sneaky. And
Yeah,
and I don't know if you heard I think it was Justin Hamner, and I can't remember where I heard it, but he was on a podcast somewhere, and he said the exact same thing that you just said about the bill, using the long bill so he can bang it into trees,
yeah,
which, you know, I you you are now the second person I've heard say that. That's
yeah.
really that's really neat. It I've just started playing. All of my jerk baits were the standard, I don't know, short bill,
Short bill. Yeah,
I don't know what the and I've thrown a few different types, but that was just kind of what I always threw, and
yeah,
I started playing around this winter or fall, early winter, I guess you could call it. And yeah, I like again, I'm no expert with it, but I've caught a few fish with the deeper one, and it's built my confidence a little bit, where
yeah,
I can get that thing down a little bit deeper when those fish are holding deeper. Uh,
yeah. No, I will tell you that I had a friend of mine. So I had a friend that I tried to get into jerk baits a long time ago, and he was into big swim baits. And of course, he finally he finally got on board on the jerk baits, and then he introduced me to the bigger jerk baits, like the the big size,
how,
oversized jerk baits.
how big we talking? Like
These things are like they're 6 inches. That like the Canada, right? That's one.
okay,
All right.
and that's a mega bass.
That is a mega bass. Yep. So he introduced me to those, and he's like, "Man, have you tried the big jerk baits?" And I'm like, "I have not actually." And then I started using them, and I caught a 10 pounder on one using
Dude.
the oversized ones. Yeah. And so those oversized jerk baits, you need a different setup. because they tend to be a little bit heavier, right, than your traditional jerk baits. So you
Okay.
do you usually do go with the more heavier duty setup. Um, but you get me around grass with that thing. Oh my god! Like it can be super deadly, and then you really trigger some big fish with that.
Because that's something else that I've never really associated jerk baits with grass. You got multiple sets of trebles, and it just seems like it would foul all the time.
Yeah, those jerk baits are designed to. They have a buoyancy. They float super fast. So like when you jerk them, they go
Okay.
down, and then they go right back up real quick. So
Gotcha.
they only go to like a 5 foot. You know what I'm saying? So if you find grass that's like topped out at like that top of the water level, right to the down of the grass, if you have about 5 feet right there, oof, it's deadly right there.
Gotcha.
You can skim the top of the grass with it. You know.
Because that's something I've wanted to play around with. I've
Mhm.
I've used more. I've actually caught more fish with a floating jerk bait than I ever have with the diving like suspending style. And just because I used to fish rivers a bunch,
Yeah.
and in college I got a hold of one of those, and I realized those big super rogues. I don't even think they make a floating version anymore. But this gigantic bait that I never used to think a smallmouth would hit. There's times a year where I think they just want to kill it. It makes them
Yeah.
mad, and
Yeah,
I've
yeah. Jerk baits to me in a river system. Oh my gosh, in the river system they work so much better because when you have that current, like it's hard for them to. They're usually behind something, right, trying to evade the current so that they're not getting tired. And in a current system, that jerk bait is like so deadly. Like it's probably one of the best places to use it is in a current system.
okay.
Yeah, as long as you know how to make sure you don't get hung up, right? So
That that was why I threw the floating because
yeah,
the shallow riffles and rocks and stuff. The only way I could keep out of that stuff, I don't know how many carp I snagged in that shallow water with a suspending. So
this is
I
it.
I would
Yeah,
always like lean towards a floating style. Um, but I mean, outside of that like application, uh, I want to play around with some grass because I've used crankbaits and plastics and buzz frogs and all sorts of other stuff around grass, but I've never really thrown even those floating styles. I haven't devoted much time to it. I'm kind of
yeah.
curious if I could trigger
Well,
fish the way that you're describing in that real shallow water.
yeah. There's a play. You can get even more creative, right? Like if you're when you're talking about those big jerk baits, like if you're fishing 5 foot of water and there's a grass mixed in there, you can throw those things on 20-pound test line, 25-pound test line, and then you just really don't let it do much other than just stay on the surface. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to using those things, and the time of year matters, right? Because obviously you don't want to be doing that during this time of year. You're not really going to find so much fish in that 5 foot of water or less, unless it's down south, and maybe you can get away with it. But a lot of time, those bigger fish, it's hard to find them that shallow this time of year.
Gotcha.
Not to say, yeah, and that was my one of my go tos was sinking those jerk baits and finding those bigger fish because those bigger fish do tend to like colder waters. At least my understanding is they tend to like that a little bit. And now big fish in the summer when it gets super hot, they tend to go shallow too, like find those grass areas. So I mean
Hmm,
I don't really know 100%, but when it gets starting to get cold, I usually find big fish in that 15-foot range.
15 foot. Okay.
Yeah, about that 15-foot range, and jerk baits usually only good to 8. So you got to get creative. You know what I mean? If you want to trigger, if they're not biting your worm or your jig, things like that, then you can sink those things to go down. But then the only way to make them effective is using live scope because then otherwise you're gonna get hung up.
Gotcha. So the live
Yeah.
scope allows you to actually watch it and not let
Mhm.
it settle in the
In the hop.
timber or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know I've heard of guys using suspend dots or the lead wire. Is that how you weight yours, or are there other sneaky things people can do?
So this is one of the reasons I like Megabass, because it's Megabass is so fine tuned that when you alter the hooks, that alone just causes them to sink. Where
Hmm.
most of your other manufacturers make a very buoyant type of jerkbait, and changing hooks doesn't do anything to it. So you got to add weight to it. But then you add weight to it, and it diminishes the ability for it to really kind of be very erratic. You know what I'm saying? The more weight you add to
Okay,
it. So to me, that's why I like Megabass, because the minute you switch out the stock hooks, it sinks.
but you
So
still keep that kind of erratic triggering
yeah.
action.
hmm
Okay,
So you just got to fine tune those. I mean, but I think Six Sense makes a deep dive, a sinking one now. I think Six Sense makes a sinking one.
I've seen.
Uh,
I haven't tried it, but
uh,
I've seen it
so
at least on
and
their
then
website.
Rapala does too. Rapala makes a sinking one that you can use. Um, yeah, so all of those techniques, I usually have different jerk baits that I carry with me throughout the year, and I try different ones to see which ones I can get them to trigger me. Surprisingly, I've gotten good at not losing them, so I don't really lose a lot of jerk baits unless I catch a gar or something with it, you know.
Ah, yeah, the toothy critters.
Yeah,
I Yeah, I don't much care
yeah,
for them. Those mega bass are what, like $25 a pop? That's an
yeah.
expensive fish.
I've caught some big old gar on the jerk baits. You know, 4 or 5 footers, man, and
Good lord.
I just sit there, and it's just like, I think what was I? I was in Florida. Oh yeah, I was in Florida when I caught. It's probably a 3.5 footer, and I caught it on a jerk bait. I had to beach it. I had to beach it, drag them out of the water, because there was just no way I couldn't hold that thing, man. There's just no way. Like,
Yeah.
there's no way I could get. Every time I try to go get him to do something, I was just like, man, he does one whip, and it was just like it's a hot mess. So I had to get off, pull
Yeah, I
him out
don't
of the water, and then finally I can get him and get over him and take it off with the pliers.
yeah, I don't want a 3 foot. I mean, those things got teeth on them. Plus, he's got the jerk bait with all those hooks in his face. All he's got to do is thrash one
Dude,
time, and then they're in you too.
I had one time. I don't know. It must have been about, you know, foot and a half or two, and you feel like, oh, it's no big deal. I can just grab him, hold him, hold him stiff. Man, those things, freaking dinosaurs, man. They have so much power. Oh my goodness, dude. You cannot hold those things even after a good long fight. I mean, you really have to be sure that you exhausted it out. Because
The
I grabbed one
scales
one
are
time.
crazy.
Yeah, the scales are crazy. I grabbed one of those thinking it was tired, and it whipped in my kayak, fell down, hit me with his teeth, cut my leg, hook
Oh,
buried the hook in my shoe, and then like busted the line. Man, it was a hot mess. I was like, man, I'll never get one of these things in my kayak again. It's like,
yeah, I don't blame you. That's kind of what I carry a net, and sometimes it's in the way. But just for treble hooks, I've so far the one time I've managed to get hooks in myself, it was because I had them all chained together, hanging on the vent in the car, and wasn't paying attention and brushed up against it and buried it in my arm.
oh yeah,
I've yet to have a fish, knock on wood, do it to me. But I'm
yeah,
with trebles, I don't mess around. It's going in that net, and I'm gonna be, you know,
yeah.
I'm I do
Oh
not
yeah.
want to have to stop fishing to go to the ER to get hooks out of my
No,
hand.
absolutely, man. I've learned to appreciate the fish grips. Before, I never used to use them, and then I use them whenever you get situations like that where you boat a fish that hasn't kind of like really given all the fight out. You can get a fish grips real quick and take them off if you need to. But most of the time, I've gotten pretty good at it to where I can just grip them with my hand, and you've done it a few times. You kind of know when to do it and when not to do it. So, but yeah, I've gotten hooks in my thigh, gotten hooks in my fingers. Uh, it's a matter of it's gonna happen. It's just trying to figure out. It just doesn't happen that severe.
Yeah. I want to go back to you were talking about setup, and you said 12 pound is what you go to a lot, and that's enough to handle is strong enough to handle these big fish.
Yeah.
As far as the rod or the gear ratio in your reel, is it? I've heard guys say under 7 foot. I know the one I like's a little bit shorter because I feel like I'm always sticking it in the water if I don't have
Mhm.
if I go over 7 foot. Um, is that something similar to what you're doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, in a kayak, it's a lot different than a boat, right? Because you're gonna definitely get. You definitely don't want to go over 7 foot. Some people will go over 7 foot if they're fishing on a boat. They're making some really long casts. You can still get away with not having to. There's a way to do it to where you're not hitting the water. But anything over 7 foot, for the most part, your average person, the tip's gonna hit the water. Unless you're 6'5" or something. You know what I'm saying? Tall
Gotcha.
guy.
Yeah,
But
I'm not that lucky.
yeah, me neither. So mine is 7 foot, and the reason I like 7 foot in a kayak is because no matter what you do, it doesn't matter how short your rod is in a kayak, you're gonna hit the wall. You know what I'm saying? So like 7 foot, 6.5, it doesn't matter for me. I got it already to where I want the distance. I want to be able to cast far. So I want at least the 7 foot to make those really long casts in situations where I got to be a far away from like a brush pile or something because I'm not getting it to react. I noticed that with the scope, I feel like anything under 50 feet, uh, they tend to feel you and you a little bit harder to catch them. So I usually like
Even
to
in
be
the kayak.
yeah. I usually with the scope on because they'll run
Gotcha.
from the scope. I usually like to be 50 feet plus out, but
Okay.
um, 7 foot is what I have, and I usually get it out there, and I usually just you can't really do it down unless you're standing up all the time, but you can't stand up every single time, especially if it's a windy day. That's when the
Hmm.
jerkbait shines. You're not going to be able to stand up all the time and stay on your target. You know what I mean? Unless at least unless you have spot lock, but I don't have spot lock in my kayak, so I usually kind of face the wind, and I have to cast against the wind, and I have to be
Hmm.
sitting down, right, and then I'm pedaling with my 360 trying to stay in position. So I'm always jerking down to the side, and so 7 foot versus 6'5" is not going to do any difference for me. I'd rather have the casting distance. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And then as far as I mean, I guess with something like a jerkbait, you are taking up slack in the line. You're not, we're not reeling them in. At least I'm not. I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's a tradition. Whatever. Van Dam was kind of the king of that, right? So you definitely have to do what he's always preached, right? Is uh, jerking them on the slack line. Absolutely. That's how
Okay.
you're gonna get them. That's how you're gonna get it to dart and take the line with it, right? Because if you don't jerk it on a slack line, then it'll go left or right, whatever the case is. But it doesn't have that line. It has that tension, so it's not gonna really get its full movement. See what I'm saying? So
Okay.
if you don't jerk it on a slack line, it's not going to have the runoff time to really do its thing like it should. So, but the gear ratio, I don't know that it. I can't really say that it's going to matter too much for me personally because most of your movement is with the rod.
Gotcha.
It's not your reel. So if I had to choose, I want to say I use an Aldebaran. I like the Aldebaran Shimano for my jerkbait. I don't
Okay.
use a B. So now they came out with BFS stuff. Probably would be good, but I like to have 12-pound test line. So that Aldebaran holds enough line for the 12-pound versus the 10 because
Gotcha.
I do cycle between 10 and 12-pound test line. Just depends where I'm at. If I'm in open water, very super clear water, 10-pound test line. Even I don't know. I don't even know if I've thrown it on 8 before, but I don't really have had a lot of trouble with the 10-pound using like Invisix or something.
Okay.
But
You ever you ever go spinning?
no,
Okay.
no. Um, I will tell you that I just it's uncomfortable for me. I've tried it with the smaller jerk baits that really like the Nanahan. right?
Okay.
They sell a smaller version. It's hard to throw that obviously on a regular bait caster if it's a windy day, so you end up doing a little bit better with the spinning cast. I I get too tired with the spinning. I don't know if it is because of the way you hold it
Gotcha.
or yeah, not sure, but I would just get a BFS rod, lighter version, and I do just I mean the alder bearing. I throw an alder bearing on a 7 foot medium, and that's what I use my jerk bait with, and I can cast that thing 100 feet. You know what I'm saying? Because it goes out of my sight, my scope, and I have my scope out to 100 feet out is usually what I have my scope at, and it goes
Dang.
past that.
That's
Yeah,
slinging it. I definitely can't throw it that far on my setup.
yeah.
Maybe I need that longer rod.
7 foot uh, weight transfer system jerk bait, right? Gotta have
Okay.
a weight transfer system jerk bait. You can't can't do that with a not with a jerk bait that doesn't have a weight transfer system in it. Can't do that. So
Gotcha.
gotta have that weight transfer, and then just having a setup that you got it dialed in really good, man. That just swings it out there, right? So
Okay. And you talked a little bit about cadence earlier with the pauses, where at least down in Texas, you're not giving it real long pauses, maybe a couple of seconds between those jerks. But is there anything? I know it's always weird asking questions like this because I know there's no true rules in bass fishing. Like, there's always
mhm.
exceptions, but is there a standard retrieve that you start with, or do you kind of mix it up and just keep trying different things until you connect with something?
Yeah, so my natural way of doing things is always I tend to have a hard jerk to it to where it's usually 1 2 or 1 2 3. That's usually my standard. That's
Okay,
what I use. That's what I go to all the time. If that doesn't work, then I have to be more conscious of making sure that I'm just doing a very because that jerkbait moves a lot, and when you see people hitting it really hard, like it's doing some serious movement down there. You know what I mean? So
okay,
like there's times where if it's super cold and it's super clear water, sometimes to make it look like it's injured, you don't hit it that hard. You know what I'm saying? It's like you once you hit it and you feel the that pull that where you know that you've reached that resistance, you stop. But most of the time, I'm doing a really hard jerk down here down south because the water temps are not that cold, and fish are usually pretty active all year round here. I mean, yes, we have a lot of Florida strain fish, but I've noticed that unless it's getting under 55, they're still pretty active here. You know what I mean?
okay.
And so most of our water temps tend to stay in the high 50s. You know, if it's not a cold winter here, and so
I'm
yeah,
I'm jealous.
yeah,
I
yeah. It's
maybe not so much in the summer. Maybe not in the summer when it's 100 every day, but
yeah, no, yeah. But I will tell you that it is night and difference when you're talking about San Antonio and Dallas. Dallas can get very cold, and in Fort and like Lake Fort, yeah, you can get some serious cold temps, and to where like they almost seem like northern temps. You know, so it it's weird how it gets so cold up there, and down here in San Antonio it doesn't. So I'm used to that more aggressive jerk baits, and I
gotcha.
have to remind myself when, like, we had a tournament one time in Lake Fort. I don't know. I think I ended up in fourth place or fifth place, and it was freezing.
Yeah, I was
As
down there for that one.
it was freezing, man. A guy,
The one Garrett one,
yes,
where
I
it was
think
like 17 degrees or something the
yes,
one night.
yeah,
Oh gosh, that sucked.
that sucked bad, man. Yeah, that was terrible.
Oh,
Those those time of you want to slow down a little bit. So those water temps are really cold, and you won't get them to react if you're overworking the jerk bait. And so yeah,
okay.
those are times of, like, for me it's just hard because I have a hard time slowing down. I tend to fish very fast. You know what I mean? Um, well, when I'm doing jerk bait, when we're talking specifically jerk baits, but I have friends that fish faster than I do, and I'm like, holy crap, dude! Like I feel like I fish fast, but damn, they fish much faster than I do.
Well, shoot. I mean, I guess whatever works. If you're catching fish, keep doing it. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. Right now, it's just I haven't been fishing as much, and the jerkbait is just getting to that point where it's starting to get pretty good. I do some boat tournaments with some friends, and yeah, and they see me work that jerkbait, and they're like, "Damn, dude, I got." They don't like the jerkbait either, just they don't have the patience for it. But I'm like, I'm not a very patient person, man. I just learned to value, like, I understand the value of this damn thing. It's like super, super triggering for fish, and I fish it fast, so it's like it's not like you're really slowing down a whole lot, unless, like I said, unless you're fishing in some serious cold water.
gotcha. Well, last question I've got. I guess one piece of advice, something for somebody who's just starting out. Like, what's the biggest key, the thing that they should focus on to be more successful as they're learning this technique?
Well, I will tell you that the rod and the size of your hooks. So your rod is going to be able to help you pin those bigger fish. I always tell people when you catch a lot of fish, if you're not catching big fish, then you may not understand the value of the equipment of how dialed needs to be. So like the rod has to be right with the jerkbait because you can catch tons of 1-2 pounders, but the minute you go 5 plus, that's when your equipment gets exposed. So making sure that you have the right rod. I use a medium. Um, it's usually a little bit on the softer side, and your hooks have to be. They cannot be really really thick wire hooks. They got to be strong, but they can't be real thick wire hooks because on a long cast, you have a medium rod. You're not going to get that hook set. You're not going to get all those three set of hooks or two set of hooks driving into a big fish has bigger gill plates, stronger, tougher mouth. So those gill plates are not as soft as like the little world fish are. So when you have a long cast and you have a medium rod, you need very sharp, razor sharp hooks, and they got to be thin wire but strong. Japanese tend to make some really thin wire hooks that are just strong. That's what I like to resort to. My success comes from being able to catch fish from 80 feet, 90 feet out, pulling them into buying a jerkbait, and they jump multiple times. You're never going to lose them if you got a good hooks and making sure you have the right rod. Because the right rod, those head shakes on 5 plus pounders, there's a lot of tension on that. So a stiffer rod might you might get away with it fishing ponds, catching 2 pounders, maybe 3 pounders here and there. But when you start targeting big fish with jerk baits, you need that parabolic because those little treble hooks don't go in too deep. You know what I'm saying?
Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. They pass the barb, but those bigger fish, you got to make sure you have them pinned, and you got to have that rod be able to do the work for you.
Gotcha. That's good
Yep.
advice.
Yep.
Well, Rolando, I appreciate you making some time for us. Are you going to be out there after this coming year fishing the Bassmaster Series?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to make some of them. I think my schedule's freeing up a little bit more to where I can actually make this happen a lot more often than I was able to, this previous year. So yeah, I got a friend of mine that I'm talking to see if we can make these trips and get out there, man. I definitely want to.
Nice. Well, I'm thinking along the same lines. I don't know that I'm going to be able to make a ton of them, but I'm definitely trying to get down to Florida next month.
Yeah, yeah,
I
we've made Florida the last 2 years, and I really do like Florida. I gotta change my luck on there. I've had some bad luck going down there, and I always had a strong first. I have a crappy first day and then a very strong second day. I need to be able
gotcha.
to just do both days.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give you the floor for a second. If there's anybody you want to plug, sponsor or anything
Yeah.
like that, anything else
Well,
you want?
I've been I've been running Z Pro batteries for a long time. I don't know if they're going to be around next year. They might be going a different direction, but if not, they've always been really good. Never had trouble with them. And then I got a little tackle shop here in San Antonio. The owner is Sam Garza, Outdoor Alphas, great guy. He's always supported me, and then I sponsor myself because I do mortgage loans. So anybody that's buying a house, that's what I specialize in. And even if I'm not in your state or you need some advice, give me a call. I know loans like in and out, back of my hand. I've been doing this since 2010. So that's how I make my true living, right? Doing helping people get into homes, and was an underwriter for 10 years. Then I went to sales, so I know the process from A to Z when it comes to buying a house. So if anybody ever has questions, you can always call me. But other than that, no, I got to find some new sponsors for next year, and I got to balance that out with work and hobbies. So
Sure.
I keep that up.
Yeah, definitely shoot at me your contact info, and we'll drop that at least in the YouTube video down in the description, so
Mhm.
folks can go down there and look you up for that loan advice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate it, Justin.
Yeah, Rolando, I appreciate it. Hopefully I run into you down in Florida here before too long.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. Always, if I see you, I'll say hi, and likewise the other way around.
Yeah, man. Thanks again.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Rolando Nandin, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that was fun. Rolando dropped a lot of juice there, a lot of good info, but we're not done yet. We have got two remaining segments, and I'm going to start with Kings of the Week. And while I'm working on the screen share here, let's see. All right, we are going to start with Mr. Troy Wines. Troy is a fellow Virginia angler with a pretty cool challenge that he set for himself this year. And I think I've mentioned him here on the show before, but he wanted to catch 30 trophy smallmouth. And a trophy fish or a citation for Virginia is 20 inches. His goal was to catch 30. To put that in perspective, I have caught 10 ever that are 20 inches and certified in Virginia. I got 6 this year, by far my best year, and I was pretty stoked about that. Troy, this post is from December 18th. I'm not sure if that's the day he actually caught the fish or just when he announced it. But Troy caught that fish, and let me switch. Yeah, there it is. 20 3/4 inches, his 30th trophy smallmouth of the year. So I had to give a shout out to Troy. That is an awesome fish. He's our first King of the Week. And we're going to go share the screen again. I think. I still, in 2025, struggle with technology. It's sad. It lets me know that I'm as old as I feel sometimes. All right, here we go. Our second King of the Week. And this is a former guest on our show, Will Lambert, with a massive, massive fish he just caught down in North Carolina, Sheeran Harris Lake, I believe. Let's see if I can zoom in. That is 23 and a half, I think. It looks like 23 and a half to me. And according to the post, it was 9.7, I believe, but over 9 pounds. Awesome fish. Congrats to Will and Troy, our Kings of the Week. And our final segment, Yakking on a Budget. Another tip courtesy of Brandon Yoder. Thank you for all the good tips to share, Brandon. This one, it's a little different, but I like it. I've found that not only do I spend a lot of money, on gas when traveling to fish, on baits, tackle, rods, reels, all that stuff. When I'm on the road, it's really easy to spend a lot of money on junk food at the gas station. And the tip that Brandon shared was packing a lunch. Really simple, um, really simple, but hard to do sometimes. But I've found that if I can get in the habit of actually prepping some meals for when I go on the road. I save a lot of money and I eat a lot better. Something as simple as tuna packets. They don't taste the best, but I can get tuna packets and take a few of those in a spoon, and you can eat it in the boat. I can eat it when I get to the ramp or on the way to the ramp. But something that for a couple bucks, it's basically all protein. You can get salmon ones, tuna ones. Again, maybe not the best tasting food, but for a couple bucks, you get good calories, and it's a heck of a lot easier on the wallet and better for you than the gas station food. So I thought that was an awesome tip. Hopefully, everyone out there agrees, or at least some of you out there agree. Save yourself some money, pack a lunch, don't waste money eating out on the road. And that's going to do it for this edition of Kayak Fishing Weekly. Thanks again to our guest Rolando Nandin, and thanks to Brandon for that yakking on a budget tip. We'll be back next week. I've got an exciting guest uh, planned. I don't want to jinx it and say too much, but the plan is to talk muskie fishing next week. Something, again, get out of my comfort zone a little bit. Something that I don't know very well, but I hope to learn from someone who is very good at it. That's the plan. Again, hopefully I didn't just jinx it, but hopefully we will be talking muskie fishing next week. And until then, remember to take a kid fishing.